speaking, but welcome everybody to Building a Brand with Ben Liebmann. Ben was the former chief operating officer at a little restaurant in Copenhagen that you may have heard of called Noma, and he was the COO there for 7 years. During his time at Noma, he built and helped build it from a single restaurant, being the flagship, to a quite a diversified restaurant group. He took the Noma brand and expanded it by opening up some other restaurants. And what were those restaurants? What are the other restaurants in kind of the Noma family, Ben?
Yeah. Um, so we took somewhat of a different approach, which was, um, I mean, it's quite timely given the conversation we'll have. Noma's always been guided by this principle of time and place, singular. This idea of um, one should cook as informed by where you are in the world and the time of the year in which you are there. That has informed everything from its kind of focus around seasonality, around foraging, around fermentation. Um, but it was always time and place. It wasn't places, which meant that Noma would always be this single unit concept in Denmark. But how do you grow a business around a restaurant that is break even at best? And that's not me speaking out of turn. Those are things that Renee has been very public in sharing. And we did that by investing in our former talent. So rather than creating the Noma Steakhouse or Noma Italian or even Renee Steakhouse or, etc. We kind of flipped the model on its head and identified that key to our brand, and to use the language of business, one of the strongest assets we had was our talent. And we've been very privileged that over the years, hundreds, if not thousands of people had kind of passed through those doors, whether they be cooks, waiters, servers, business leads, etc. And one way that we could grow the business without stretching the brand, because my view has always been that brands are quite tactile and you need to know the kind of pressure point, because at some point you can stretch them too far, they lose their elasticity. But one way that we could do that was investing in our former chefs, and we did that with Rocio Sanchez, former pastry chef at WD-50, pastry chef and R&D at Noma. She left to create a concept called Ear de Sanchez, which was a taqueria in the food markets at Copenhagen, which has since spawned three locations and a restaurant, her own restaurant, Sanchez. We did it with Richard Hart in helping him build Hart Bakery, which went from one location to what will be 10 locations in Copenhagen, with plans to open overseas. Christian Baumann at 108, Thomas Friebel at Inwa. Unfortunately, we had to close Inwa. That was our partnership in Tokyo. Torsten Schmidt at Restaurant Bar. So we kind of created, as I say, a portfolio, to use that language of concepts that were very talent, chef-led, founder-led. That was very much our way of kind of growing it, and then also built it around partnerships, commercial partnerships with the likes of American Express, pop-ups, live events, kind of taking Noma on the road for these limited run residencies, Tokyo, Sydney, Mexico, Kyoto, publishing, and then media. We launched a media company with a series that will launch on Apple in a couple of months' time. They were expressions of the brand. So I share that not only as part introduction, but also to maybe ground some of the things that we'll touch on today.
Sure. Let's start talking about it. So our clients, as you know, or because you've worked with us and you've been a client, mostly restaurant owners and operators. And a lot of our clients are thinking about how to diversify their portfolios, how to grow their group. It's been all the rage over the last few years, especially since the pandemic. And we're all thinking about how to make money in this industry. And oftentimes what comes up is, well, we have to grow our brand. And you hear the word brand all the time. You hear it in social media world, you hear it in the restaurant world. And so I think we need to define a little bit what we're even talking about. So to you, what is a brand in restaurants and hospitality?
Um, if you'll afford me one chance to just read some notes that I made, because it was what I am, and I thought this will be, a likely question, and this way I can avoid missing anything and later have those, oh shit, I should have mentioned
Read
this moment.
away. No shame in
But
reading.
I'll read this bit and then we can kind of jump back. So for me, what is the brand? The brand is the story of the chef or the story of the operator. It's the personality of those people and every member of the team. It's the reputation, good and bad, of the chef, the owner, the team members. It's the location, it's the design, it's the playlist, food on the plate, it's the sourcing of the ingredients, it's the drink program, it's the service and the experience that you create for your guests, it's the way you treat your own people, it's the brand identity. So the visual identity. Often people think that a brand is the logo or the name or the font. Those things are important, but they are a visual representation of the brand itself. It's the website. It's the content you share and the tone of voice that you share on social media. It's everything that happens outside of the four walls. It's the brands that you endorse, the brands you promote, potentially the brands you collaborate with, to any products or services that you may launch beyond the restaurant itself. The books, the pantry items, the hard lines, the TV shows that maybe you appear on, to the events that maybe you speak at. It's the things you do, but it's equally the things that you don't. And it's also how you do those things. It's a very overused term, but I think it's very relevant, very important. It's that idea of being genuine and being authentic. If you're going to create, I was about to say a sausage roll, but I don't know if that's relevant to people in the US. But if you're going to, create a diffusion brand and create a pantry item, or do the hot dog, make it the best damn hot dog that the world has ever seen. For me, it's equally about how you do it versus what you do. It's the purpose and impact, and I think increasingly those things are becoming important as well. It's what you stand for inside your community. So a great brand can be a movement, and I found, as I was kind of thinking about this, there's a gentleman by the name of John Hegarty. Actually, he's Sir John Hegarty. He founded Saatchi and Saatchi, the ad agency. And he would say, don't start a business, start a brand. Because whatever business idea you have, as original as you think it may be, somebody will copy it, but you can't copy the brand. That's where the value in your business really resides. It's the sum of all those parts that I just read out. So it's never that one thing. It's kind of multitude of it. That's what makes a brand. That's also what makes a great brand.
So when we're thinking about the importance of great brands, and we'll talk more about that, what
Mm,
questions should restaurateurs be asking themselves when they're creating their first restaurant and thinking about branding? They're not just thinking about the name, the look, the feel, but there's other things that they should be thinking about, because as we know, these days you can't just open one restaurant. So usually when we're opening up number one, we're starting to think about what a restaurant group might look like, what number two
yes.
might look like. What questions are we asking ourselves before we launch?
Um, I think it's about, rather than kind of asking, rattling off a series of questions, I think it's as much about the process. Um, you know, in the past when I was clearly not there for the conception of Noma. I joined, this is their 20th anniversary this year, so I joined in year 12, year 13. So a lot of that lifting had been done. Everything from creating that visual identity and having that mission statement, having that purpose of what it was that they believed the restaurant would stand for. Rene was very clear about areas of the business that he, at least at that point in time, and I think that's something that we can touch upon on this call as well, is that things can change, and invariably they will change. Either market circumstances will change, but your opinion might change. How you feel at the beginning of a concept versus 20 years in will be most likely fundamentally different. Um, excuse me. You don't have to solve all of the questions, some of the things that we'll touch on day one. sometimes it's about optionality. It's about not closing doors on things, allowing yourself the kind of ability to evolve and shift, to be organic as time moves on. It's in some flippant way. I think when we were having a prep call, I said, there's that old children's game, and I'm perhaps maybe really showing my age here, but guess who? The old board game. We would start with, these series of faces, and eventually you'd start knocking them down based on questions. Did they have glasses? Did they have hair? Yes, no. And you'd literally start shutting them down. To some degree, when building a brand, I think it's important to kind of close the door on things that you are adamant about. Maybe that is that this will be a single concept brand. That doesn't mean that you can't, around that, create an ecosystem. If you look at, say, Union Square Hospitality, that is a portfolio, that is an ecosystem of brands, of concepts. There's a business here in Australia called Merivale. It's the same thing. They have 85 concepts, everything from local bars to the equivalent. We don't have Michelin in this country, but the equivalent of 3 Michelin star restaurants, and everything in between is, that for me is one of those questions of, am I going to create a concept that itself can grow, or do I want to create an amazing concept and then in time around it create other concepts that may share the same purpose, the same values, the same kind of mission, but maybe expressed in a different way.
And that's important to know at the beginning. You'd want to know if it's a brand that can be expanded, or if you just want to start creating this atmosphere around the brand, this reputation around the brand, that you can open up other concepts. Give me some examples so we can start talking about real world things of some chefs or restaurant groups who you think have particularly strong brands.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it almost leads to a delineation between, well, again, what is the brand? Is it an individual? Do they eclipse the brand of their restaurants? Do they eclipse the brand of their restaurant groups? Are they one and the same? I would argue that perhaps there is no Noma without Rene Redzepi, because it is that singular expression. Like, again, it is that one restaurant. And of course he can come and go as he does. He's not in that restaurant every night of the week, although he is there more often than most. But it is harder to separate perhaps Restaurant Noma from Rene. If you think about somebody like Gordon Ramsay or Dave Chang or Jamie Oliver or, Dominique Crenn or Christina Tosi, in some way their brands have eclipsed those of their restaurants, either because, in the case of, say, Gordon, his business has become so diversified now, in that it is restaurants, multitude of concepts across multiple locations around the world. It is.
When I think of Gordon Ramsay, I think of a former soccer player who yells and screams at people. What is his brand?
Which is a really good thing. I mean, I'd argue that, at least in my experiences with him, that personality has become and I don't say this in the pejorative, it's almost a caricature now. That is a character that he plays. Mm-hmm. And that is part of expressing his brand. Take Dave. I think Dave Chang is a brand in his own right. He's now expressing that across a variety of formats. Interestingly, has closed the majority of restaurants, although word on the street is going back to them. When I think about restaurant brands, Carbone is absolutely a brand. Shake Shack is a brand. To varying degrees. And I think that's, sorry to kind of, I'll go in tangents. It's something, David, from our previous conversations, but to everybody else, I'll kind of give you warning and apologize. A brand shouldn't necessarily be measured by global status or the size of the follower count. A brand can be just as powerful Gordon's brand with 40 million followers and everything that he has or hasn't been able to do with that is obviously a very extreme, is an exceptionally powerful thing. But a local restaurant, kind of a local favorite with a follow account of, very passionate, very loyal clientele, maybe single digit thousand followers, that can be just as powerful a brand, because really it's not about the size, it's about the engagement. It's about a brand is only as powerful as the audience that it engages. And whether that's, and I don't say that from the perspective of engagement through things that you can sell, but it's the touch points and the kind of the ability that you give your audience, again, whether they be viewers, readers, diners. It's those touch points that you give them to kind of live and engage with you and your brand.
Let's start about talking about how you build a brand. A lot of the people on this webinar who are watching have a brand, they have restaurants, but they're curious as to, well, how do you start to really build it so it becomes well known? Because, like you said, a brand is all about capturing audience. And you want
Mm-hmm.
to capture as much audience. And I just stole that from the Martha Stewart documentary that I was watching last night, where one of the media executives said that that is what it's all about. It's about capturing
Yeah.
audience. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you establish this brand? Do you need to start with a flagship restaurant in the restaurant business to launch a brand? Is that the best way to go? Do you need to get on TV first? What do you think is a good start?
I think to some degree it depends on what success looks like, and that can help inform where one starts. I often say to many of my clients, and anyone that'll listen, it's not romantic to say it anymore. But in 2024, what is a chef anyway? Um, it's certainly not. I don't think in the eyes of the masses, in the eyes of the kind of greater public. Um, a chef is not necessarily somebody that was professionally trained and works in a professional kitchen and wears, the traditional chef's whites. Um, Somebody who can be a great home cook or works in a food truck or has started a CPG brand. The terminology we may as industry professionals say, well, they're cooks, they're not chefs, or they're influencers, they're not chefs. That's us arguing amongst about semantics these days. I think, again, if you think about audience first, client first, customer first, they don't care anymore. And to some degree, that's also a really powerful thing for the industry to think about as well, is to some degree, those definitions were kind of borders or kind of hurdles that we put upon ourselves. Well, you're not really a chef unless you've kind of served your time and you've staged here and you've kind of worked your way up the line, and now you've kind of cut your teeth. Now you're entitled to call yourself this. All of that is gone, and we can put aside, because I think we need a bigger conversation, what that's done around gender and race and all of that. So all of that is gone. So we now have this level playing field. And I
I
think
hear
it's
that. I hear the word chef is, not as defined as it used to be, nor as important in some respects. But our clients want to know, because we're restaurateurs.
yeah,
We're building our brand. Okay.
yeah.
We're starting with one.
Hmm.
What
Start
is
with
it?
the best. Start with the best one. I mean, it's. I'm going to butcher that thing of. Well, I'll come back to that in a second, but I can tell you. I mean, I've been in circumstances where we were opening one of those kind of concepts that we had invested in some of our former chefs, providing them a limited the limited capital that a fine dining restaurant could provide, and a lot of the sweat equity and some of the brand halo and things like that. And I remember standing in one of those restaurants on, the day before the opening, and one of the financial backers came in and said, "Oh, this is amazing. I can see the 30th. I can see global expansion." And it caused, I saw Renee's kind of fists, and he's kind of clicking his knuckles, because he turned to that individual and just said, can we just let her, it was Rosia Sanchez, can we just let her open her first? Can we just let this one be the very best that it can be? And in success, she has the optionality to open that second and that third. That's not to say she was making it up as she went along. And, it was one of the reasons why we did invest in branding. Remember, not the brand, but branding was to kind of set a visual kind of standard and a tone of voice and a language that we would talk about ourselves, or that particular restaurant. We did that up front because then we had that kind of guiding principle of, okay, if we now open a second, we know what we want that to look like. We have a kind of a playbook, but it wasn't part of the plan. I think the question of, do you need a restaurant? No, you don't. A great brand can come from anywhere now. It can be, as we said, the food truck, the bakery, the wine bar, the CPG brand. It may start from somebody who has been toiling at home and gets onto a television show. I think where having a restaurant is important is if that is part of that initial brand story. If you start building your brand, if you start getting awareness and attention through other means, a product on shelves, an appearance on a television show, and then you come to opening a restaurant down the track, I think that's a kind of a very organic process. I think if you have built your brand within the four walls, you've created a physical presence, the brand story has begun, the brand has been built, you're kind of attracting an audience. To some degree, I think that becomes your anchor.
How do you capitalize on momentum? From my experience in the restaurant industry, I see a lot of our clients who get off to a good fast start. Everybody's talking about them. And then fast forward a year and a half, 2 years, and the buzz is gone, and they're just kind of languishing, or they're plateauing, let's just say. And it always seems like a shame because when they had the buzz and when they had the attention, they weren't capitalizing on it. How do you capitalize on attention? When you're building your business plan and you're thinking, I'm going to open up the greatest, I don't know, whatever, French restaurant,
Yeah.
with natural wines, and it's going to be successful, and I'm planning on it to be successful. How do you plan to take advantage of the buzz when, you're still in the first you're still in the first 6 months or so, or a year of the restaurant, which we all know is very difficult, but you want
Yeah.
to capitalize on it because it doesn't last forever. And so when you're the hot ticket in town,
It
what's some next move you can make to gather more audience and to have more eyes on you?
it doesn't. No, you're right. It doesn't necessarily last forever. That said, um, if you think that something is going to end and you build a plan to kind of capitalize on that ending, let me put it this way. I've said to a number of chefs, and I've spent the last now 9 years, 10 years working in support of the industry alongside some fantastic creators, some amazing operators, either in-house or as an advisor, as a consultant, but I've also been around big media brands in my career as well. But the thing I've said to chefs is, I love the trade, but one of the greatest failings is you all believe it's going to end tomorrow. And if you believe it will end tomorrow, then chances are you're going to act as if it will end tomorrow. And if you act as if it will end tomorrow, then the odds are it will. It almost sets in motion this self-fulfilling prophecy of, it's going to end tomorrow, so I have to rush out and I have to do everything. I have to get the product launched and I have to, try to get the publishing deal, and I need to get a try on television, and I need to do the events. And the problem is you start stretching that brand beyond, it loses its elasticity, but you start stretching it at a really formative stage. Because whilst I think, again, you're right, a restaurant can kind of create and capture lightning in a bottle. To some degree, you have to nurture that. You have to protect that. But, again, that goes back to that initial conversation of, okay, I want to create a restaurant concept. I'm very clear about what that's going to be, what the expression of that idea will be within the four walls. Where are the opportunities in my mind that in success I would feel comfortable exploring? Is it that second location? Is it the adjacent concept? Is it the diffusion brand? Is it creating products that I can sell within the restaurant direct to consumer? Again, I think it's having a bit of a blueprint of the areas that you feel comfortable with. I mean, we could sit here today and, it would almost be a separate conversation of how do you leverage, how do you exploit the brand, or how do you realize the full value of it? How do you protect it? But, and I know, David, you've had these conversations before, but at the end of the day, as unromantic as it sounds, the people who are joining us on this call today, you are creating intellectual property. And not to kind of throw that curveball of that language into it, but ultimately, all of this is IP. All of it is. And the IP that is created by this industry, and I'm not using it from a legal term. Of course, there's those arguments of what can you protect and what can you register. But look, let's just put that aside for the moment. Ultimately, what this industry creates is intellectual property. And again, that is the menu, the brand, the experience. These are things that when you identify them as IP, then you know how to nurture them and you know how to develop them and you know how to protect them and you know how to value them. And that includes the four wall expression of that, but it also includes all of those secondary and those ancillary opportunities.
Let's talk about who helps with brand expansion and defining brands. All of our restaurant owners work with PR companies, almost all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
one of the first professionals that people usually hire, usually, a couple of months before opening, during the pre-opening stage to start ramping up. Talk to me
Yeah.
about PR from your perspective and what to look for in a PR firm and what you think they should actually be doing to help grow your brand.
Yeah. I mean, just quickly touch on it in terms of what are the other kind of people that you have. I mean, again, that could be people inside the business. It could be people from within the industry that have some, operational experience that can lend itself to building out a business plan and a brand plan. Or if you have the opportunity, it could be working with professional kind of advisors, consultants, agencies that can help you visualize that. Again, I mean, the Noma logo was created by an intern at a design agency. In the past, I've worked with more established design businesses to kind of help build that visual identity and that kind of brand roadmap to help us articulate that tone of voice. I think PR is fundamental. I mean, also, sorry, just to backtrack for a second, people like you, David, and your team, I think are fundamental these days. And not to get into what's a chili crisp or a chili crunch, but I think also protecting your intellectual property is increasingly important as well. And not just within that initial focus of your business, in terms of thinking about some of the other categories that you may wish to explore, because, okay, the name, a brand name may be protectable in the restaurant industry, but when you start to think about where else I can take that brand, do you have the rights to do that? Has somebody else grabbed that brand in another category, even if they're completely unrelated to the restaurant industry? So having people who have an understanding of the business of branding, the legality of branding, but also the kind of creativity of branding. Those are people that I think are important.
Yeah,
I
we
think
definitely have to
on
try
the
to protect trademarks from the start. We definitely know that. I do want to get back to the
yeah,
PR, and I also want to
yes,
let
but
people
sorry.
who are watching know that you can ask questions during this webinar. I see a couple coming in. I'm going to get to them, but feel free as we're talking to send me a chat. Go ahead, Ben.
So where PR is vital is to some degree it's defining the brand, kind of helping refine that message of how it is communicated to the public, whether that be through media, the media itself, or to the end consumer, the diner, the customer, the audience, but really where they're vital is kind of helping establish brand presence. Increasing the visibility of your brand, building its awareness, building its credibility, generating the positive media coverage, ultimately, driving engagement with that audience, whether they be the patrons or the influencers or the reviewers through the doors, helping you generate the column inches, to use the old language of, an interview or the think piece or the thought leadership piece. It's getting you those speaking spots on the conference circuit or the symposium circuit. It's appearances at the most important live events and experiences. It's kind of viewers on screen or books and products sold. PR is really about amplification. It's about establishing and amplifying the brand. They can be a voice at the table in that kind of process of building brand, but really it's about kind of amplification of that brand. It's about engagement with that brand. That's really where they come into the fold. And what you're looking for is people with, industry experience. Look at the breadth and the depth of their knowledge of the industry. Obviously, we're fortunate that the industry is such that there are some fantastic specialists who kind of have built their own industry experience around hospitality. Look at case studies. Look at the roster. I mean, I say this to a lot of chefs, whether it be around selecting a PR agency or when it comes time to do a cookbook, if that's something that they want to do, is look at the roster and imagine your name alongside theirs. Because often the clients that they work with or don't work with, or the books that they publish or don't publish, just to use those two examples, are a really good indication of where they focus, where they specialize, but also their own values, their own purpose. And I think working with people who kind of share your own values and purposes is really important. Look at the style of their agency. When we were coming to Australia for the Noma pop-up, when we came here, look, famously, Noma has never worked with a PR agency until recently. They've worked with kind of brand agencies as they've started to think about their product business. But historically, all PR was done in-house. When Noma came to Australia, we did that in partnership with the Australian government, with a property developer, and they wanted us to work with a PR agency to help just build that story. And they presented two options to us. One was a much more obvious, I'll use the term flashier, hospitality PR firm that had the biggest restaurants and the biggest brands on their roster. And then the other option was the smaller, younger, not that age is necessarily a factor, but the smaller, younger firm with the kind of the edgier, cooler restaurants, almost the ones that we saw ourselves being more aligned with. And despite their expectations, we went with those guys. So look at the style of the agency, because that'll give you an indication of how they look at their resourcing.
What do you expect from a PR agency post-opening? We know pre-opening, they're trying to just get the word out, let everybody know you're opening, get some people in the door during the first weeks, get the reviewers in, go through the review process, that whole cycle. But a lot of times we find that clients drop their PR companies after being open for a couple of months after the review cycle because they don't think that there's value in it. And I'm not sure if they're right or wrong. What do you think about that? Do you need a PR company to stick with you? And if so, for how long?
I think it's always, well, I think you definitely want a PR agency in the bad times as much as you want the good. I mean, that's a factor in it as well, is that PR agencies can be there. At some point, there will be a curveball thrown at your business. And that's where in the same way of having a great legal team, having a great PR firm around you to help you manage that is
right.
Really
like I'm sure
important.
David Chang with the Chili Crunch debacle had a PR team saying, "Hey, you better get out there and say something, and say you're not gonna enforce anything." And he did, and it seems instantly killed the story.
Diffused. Yeah, it did, and I'm sure he spent a lot of time and a lot of investment, a lot of money working with crisis management PR firm, whether they were his existing firm or a specialist, to say, here's how you deal with that curveball.
Mhm.
But if you think about the positive for the moment, one would argue that the importance of the PR agency is only greater after that initial opening period. I mean, yes, it's about getting the reviews, it's about getting bums on seats, it's about ensuring the right influencers are there, and influencers don't have to be social media influencers. Maybe we say the right influential people there. It may also be getting you on the speaking spots and at the kind of food and wine festival events, anything that is about continuing to build that brand and that profile of both the restaurant brand itself, but also the key team, the key leaders, whether that be the chef, the owner, the front of house staff, whatever that might be. But arguably their importance is actually after the fact. And I appreciate it as an investment to make. And in this day and age, it's a privileged investment to be able to say we're either going to build a comms team in-house or we're going to hire somebody who is able to assist us with communications, maybe that, communications and brand or communications and commercial, or to have an agency on the outside. Arguably, their importance is only greater after the fact because the public, unfortunately, we live in an age these days where our attention spans are shorter than ever, and this device has been a huge part of that. Of we get that dopamine hit and then we move on. So how do you keep that momentum after you've opened, after those reviews have come? Well, one is continuing to express your brand in the same standard with which you set out in the first place. But two, it's kind of that proactive conversation that you need to continue to have with the audience. And that might mean shifting the weight on which you put the PR agency. You may bring them on board for a project at the beginning. Help us open. We're going to bring you on. The project fee is defined. We're going to measure success. That's important too, by number of reviews, caliber of the reviews, website traffic, social media engagement, all that kind of thing. Fixed fee, fixed project. But after that, we're going to pay you a modest retainer to have you in our corner to kind of keep that, keep fueling that fire, but also be there when we need you. And again, I appreciate that all comes out of the challenged P&L that our industry has, but it's arguably a really important investment. Because I will say, just to kind of, and then close off this question, at least from my side, increasingly when you think of opportunities to build the value in your brand, whether that be with investors for the second location or the second concept, or publishers, if you ever wanted to have a book or a television show, they're not looking at the performance of the business previously. They're looking at the engagement of the brand. They're looking at how many followers you have. They're looking at how many column inches, how many publications you've been published in. And that comes from that careful management of your brand, but the careful kind of growth of that brand. And PR can be a big part of doing that.
So talk to me about some of the next kind of big hits. You're open, people know about you, there's social media, there's television, there's cookbooks. Again, watching the Martha Stewart documentary was really, really interesting last night. She was a caterer and she published her first book, I think called Entertaining, and that just blew up. It blew her up. She went from being known in Connecticut and maybe in some fancy New York City circles to being a nationwide phenomenon.
Worldwide household name.
Because of the book, which then got her on television. So how do you get, first of all, how important is it to get on TV or streaming? And how do you get there? You do a lot of work in this area.
I do. And you're right. I mean, it's funny that another case study, maybe not as significant as Martha, but he's, somebody who I like and respect is Curtis Stone, the Australian chef who has restaurants in Los Angeles. He was, at least from the masses perspective, his brand was built in television. people had forgotten the fact that he'd cut his teeth working for Marco Pierre White in the UK, and he'd run some of Marco's restaurants. What they knew him from was this good-looking, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Australian chef who traveled Australia cooking and surfing. That was his TV show. He had a TV show called Surfing the Menu. It was only 15 years into that media career that he decided, I'm going to open my first restaurant. And a lot of it's funny going back to that, what is a chef these days? A lot of people didn't realize that he was actually a chef by trade. That was where what his profession was. It's just that he'd found himself into media, or found himself in media. Television. Well, let's talk about TV and then let's talk about media. But television is still important. I mean, we've all, or many of us have, but we've all read about the disruption that the media industry, the television has faced, both traditional linear television, NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox are kind of shadows of what they once were in terms of their reach and their engagement. Cable television has been disrupted. We've seen the rise of the streamers, and now we're seeing the consolidation of the streamers. But television is still that singular medium that can bring people together for those kind of more meaningful moments. Either we were all watching the finale of that show, or we're all watching The Bear, or we're watching Succession, but it can still create that awareness and that talkability in ways that other mediums can't. But so is TV important? Yes. I mean, Massimo Bottura would say the thing that built his brand, and one metric of that would be bums on seats. The number of patrons through the door and the size of the wait list wasn't the third Michelin star, wasn't getting number one on the world's 50 best. It was being on chef's table. That was what built his brand. So television is important. That said, television is a broad church. That can be everything from chef's table. It can be an appearance on the Today Show or the local equivalent.
Let's talk about.
It can also be going on a reality and competition show, David. And
I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how
there are different entry points.
Let's talk about those entry points, because my clients want to know. So we've got our restaurants. We've got a couple of really great restaurants in the city. Tough ticket. People are talking about us. We want to get on TV. We're not going to go pitch a show and be the star of, it can be Stanley Tucci traveling around Italy. But maybe what I've seen from my clients is that they start off with guest spots, maybe a judge on some kind of a competition show, just so they can get some TV time, just so they can get some attention, just so the TV brass can see what they look like on TV and how they present themselves. Give me some entry point for
well, I would go even one step further back, David. Some chefs will agree to appear as contestants, even as another entry point as well, to which I would say just be careful what you wish for, because at the end of the day, the people who are making those shows they don't care about you or your career. They care about making great television.
Yes.
And they care about ratings. So I would just say, if you ever do decide to do that, whatever you say and do will be used in the court. Whatever you say and do will end up on television, both good and bad. And I've had conversations with chefs about that. If you want to do that, there's really one of two ways of doing it. One is hone your craft, build your audience, and do that both in the four walls of the restaurant. Do that with PR. That kind of gives you that buzz, that awareness. But also do that on social media. Maybe we should come back to that in a moment, because social media is becoming a really important medium.
We're going to talk about social media. I want to know how to get on TV. How do we get?
But my point is one of two things. It'll come organically, David, which is producers, casting agents, etc. will look at those restaurants and say that restaurant is the hot restaurant in New York. I'm looking at the chefs or the restaurant's social media, and I'm getting a sense of their personality, right? It's effectively the business card, and they will proactively approach you. The other is you work with an agent or a manager or an advisor, somebody who kind of specializes in the business of, or who kind of operates at the intersection of food and ... whether that be food and
media. What are their job titles? Where do they work?
They could be everything from people like Ben Liebmann, who works at a an advisory called Understory, which is at the intersection of food and. But traditionally it's things like UTA or CAA or William Morris, and they may be more known to your clients as, oh, they're the people who look after the Brad Pitts and the Tom Cruises and the Jennifer Anistons and the Reese Witherspoons, but they also have very significant culinary teams that are advising and acting as agents and managers, depending on who you're talking to, on behalf of chefs. And it's their job to get you those gigs. It's their job to, now they will only lean into you if you've got the kind of fundamentals of a great brand, and they will look at your social media following, and they will see the way that you are on camera, which may be your Instagram account and TikTok account. And I know that for some people, that kind of makes your kind of shoulders curl over and you're like, oh, I don't want to be a performer. But hey, if your ambition is to be on TV, either as a contestant or as a guest judge or a host, or maybe even one day have your own show, that is performative. And that is going to become part of your brand. It is an expression of that brand. So I would say television, how do you get that gig, that kind of, either as a contestant or a guest judge or a mentor or whatever? It's going to come from two ways. One is build your brand, focus on your craft, be one of those chefs or, the som or the operator that the world is talking about. Again, either at a global level or a regional level
And
or a
people will
local
come to
level.
you.
And people will come, or you work with somebody and you say, I'm going to focus on building my brand within the four walls of my restaurant. That's what I'm good at. Help me express that everywhere else. And again, get me the TV deal, or let's take a step back. Help me build the strategy behind taking my brand, which at the moment is a restaurant. Build me a brand strategy, build me a commercial strategy. And then if I'm buying into that, help me go out and execute that.
Okay. So find an agent, find someone to help with brand strategy, see if you can get some eyes on you and your restaurants through television. It's a pain in the ass.
Through
And
PR.
frankly, most restaurateurs and chefs that I know and that I'm friends with are introverts. It's weird because they have restaurants and they're talking to people all day, but nobody wants to be on TV. And the few who do and they go on, either they hate it, and then the few of those who don't hate it end up actually getting somewhere with it. And it can be incredibly lucrative, but it's a long shot. Talk to me about cookbooks. I have 10 cookbook contracts on my desk right now. Everyone's doing cookbooks, and it's always great to have. It's great marketing. It's great for the restaurant. But I'm wondering, how far does a cookbook actually take you? Can you make any money?
Depends on what it is. Yeah, you can. You absolutely can. I mean, I'm repping and negotiating some cookbooks for some authors at the moment, for some chefs at the moment. And what I say to them is, it's all relative. If you're going into the idea of publishing a cookbook just for the sole reason of money, chances are you're going to be disappointed. Because the golden days of cookbook advances and rivers of royalties to some degree have diminished. We had a spike in the category around the time of the pandemic, and it's come back. It's somewhat normalizing now, but it's cyclical and will always be. We will. I mean, if you think about it, streaming hasn't killed radio. It hasn't killed music, and digital has not killed the cookbook. It just hasn't. Even though we can access those recipes, and AI is going to kind of create a whole different. There will always be, I think, a need and a desire to have them. But a cookbook is, when I'm kind of advising the chefs and the restaurants that I work with, go into it for the right reasons. Some of it should be money. Some of it should be brand building. To some degree, the cookbook is the T-shirt at the end of the concert. It's that thing that a guest can hold on to and kind of express their personality to themselves, to their friends that come over to their houses. When they see that cookbook, it's either I went there, or that chef, that restaurant expresses my values, by having the Noma cookbook on my coffee table, or the Christina Tosi cookbook in my kitchen. That's expressing something about my personality to my friends, my family, etc. It's great for brand building. It absolutely is. It takes something that is ephemeral and makes it very kind of permanent. It kind of makes it tactile. It's a physical thing that people can hold on to. But it's about striking the right deal. View the advance as just that. An advance is there to help you realize the vision for your book and hopefully put the money in your pocket. Where the money comes is in the royalties, but the royalties come. So if you think that writing a book is the work, that's just the beginning of it. The work is also and again, social media, PR, etc. Those things all kind of converge and they come together. The cookbook success is to some degree less about the book itself. It's more about how you promote it. It's about how you publicize it. It's how you get it into the hands of book buyers and consumers. Now, where books are at the moment, this may change, but traditional restaurant books, that's where the industry is most challenged at the moment. That kind of, are you creating a book to be cooked from, or a book to go on the coffee table? Is it for the couch or is it for the kitchen? The books that are selling at the moment are the books for the kitchen. They're the books that are both accessible from a format, they're not those oversized coffee table books, the things that you can actually take into the kitchen. The recipes are presented in a way that is easy for a home cook. They may be an aspirational cook, but for a home cook. But usually they're not restaurant dishes. So that plays into the chef as the brand, because the books that are selling are at the moment fundamentally built around authors. They're author-led titles. They're not restaurant-led titles. And that may mean the chef doing more casual versions of their recipes, or a whole different kind of concept that sits along, still the same values, still the same kind of focus on quality. But, those are the books that are working at the moment. But I would say the book becomes, again, part brand building, but part financial driver as well.
Let's
But
talk
I would
about
always, if a chef says to me they want to do a book, for me, I still think it's a fantastic category to get in. It comes down to finding the right publisher, the right deal.
and the publishers are out there and they want to publish these books.
They
I
do.
think chefs
It's what
should
they
know
do.
that it's a ton of work. Oftentimes we'll also
Yes.
see we'll see big advances, 250, 350. And then when you read the contract, you realize that every expense of putting the book together comes out of that advance. So you might be getting a $250,000 advance, but you got to pay for the taster, you got to pay for the photographer, you got to pay for all of it. And by the
Pay for the
time you're
research
done,
trips.
you've made 10 grand, maybe. So it's not about
And
the
also, David, no, it's not. It's not about the advance. I always say to the publishers that I'm negotiating with on behalf of my chefs, we will be pragmatic in that, to some degree, we want to make the best possible book at the best possible budget. But I am adamant that there is some money left out of that advance to go into the chef's pocket or the author's pocket, because it takes a lot of time, and they're going to put their life into that book, and then they're going to lend their brand to promote that book. There should be some money that they get to bank on, but be mindful of that. Just to your point, not only does that 250,000 cover their time, their effort, that the promotion of that book, to write that book, any co-authors, photographers, recipe testers, stylers, research trips. The other thing is that chefs, authors need to be aware of is those advances aren't paid up front. They're usually paid in thirds, and now they're increasingly being paid in quarters. So they're being paid a quarter on signature, a quarter on delivery of the manuscript, a quarter on the publishing of the book, and a quarter 12 months later. And that's to keep the author on the hook, to keep promoting and pushing the book and doing the PR and going on the book tour, which, remember, takes them out of their restaurants. So you may not even see that full advance until 3 years down the track, because it takes time to write and publish a book. And all the while, you've got cash going out the door in terms of paying for those photographers and things. So that's where having either plug for people like David or plugs for people like myself, somebody in your corner to help argue those points and negotiate those points so that you're not left out of pocket to create this book.
That's
But yes, those
Let's
are
move
key
on to talk
factors.
about the other biggie that we're all dealing with these days, and that is the combo platter of social media and influencers. And
Yes.
what is your opinion on spending time on both? Everyone I know who has a restaurant, all of our clients obviously are on Instagram. They have some social media presence. Uh,
Yep.
there's a debate about influencers. Some people
Yep.
just despise them, and some
Yep.
clients are like, you know what, I'm all in, and they're bringing people into the restaurant. What is your opinion on both?
Social media is vital. It's absolutely, again, if you think about the world around you is fragmenting and being disrupted, and the importance of the reviews and the power of television, those things are constantly being changed. Um, Owning and controlling your own audience through social media is really important. Asterisk, though, is you don't really own and control them, whether that be the whims of the public of, Facebook is the hottest thing. Now it's not. Instagram is the hottest thing. Something will come and replace it. TikTok is there. Maybe it's not there in 6 months' time, or it's not as powerful as it was in 6 months' time. So you always have to be mindful of that. But the ability to grow your own audience, and again, that audience could be 5,000 of the most rusted on, loyal, and engaged people, or it could be 50 million people, or somewhere in between. But the ability to harness that audience, to communicate with that audience, to engage with them. We're opening on a new night. We've got the cookbook. I'm appearing at this place. We're launching a CPG brand. The ability to cut out the middleman of that communication is absolutely vital, and it could be extremely powerful. That said, you have to manage the voice with which you communicate. And again, good and bad. Did Keith McNally make a mistake in kind of the way that he communicates and the things that he says on social media? Most of us would say yes. Some might say that's part of his brand now. He's in the brand of controversy
Oh,
and
he's all
eyeballs and
in.
engagement, and
He's all in.
right.
He's clearly doing what he wants to be doing. He knows exactly what he's doing.
Exactly right. So that, you do need that plan of, what is it that I want to stand for on my channels, but you also have to invest in it. You can't, this isn't something where you can, and again, we're not talking about being, unless you want to be performative. I mean, I've seen everything from chefs that have put kind of GoPro cameras on their head and literally filmed an entire service and watched engagement. It's a British restaurant that's done that, called Fallow. And I think they've had millions of views on that clip and millions of engagements around that. And that led to column inches, and that led to bums on seats. Really clever. I've seen some chefs and restaurants use their channels to talk about issues that relate to the industry. So very kind of in the weeds, kind of inside baseball style communication. And then obviously we see social media as this very visual medium that you can express the creativity. You can show dishes, you can show the restaurant, you can kind of introduce the personalities of the team. Again, things we went back to at the very beginning, all parts of defining that brand. So social media is vital, but if you're going to do it, it's not that you can't put something up and then come back a month later, because then you'll have zero engagement. You have to constantly nurture it and evolve it. And that could be, you make the time to engage and create content on a weekly, daily basis, or you create a bank of content once a month and then you release it, over a period of time. And that way you're able to manage your time more efficiently. Influencers, they are what they are, and they're not going anywhere. They're just not. I think they will become, I think there are going to be guidelines, maybe not in the US, but certainly in other international markets. There are going to be regulated guidelines around how influencers have to operate and the way in which they need to be transparent, both with the audience, but also the people that they possibly work with. But we love and hate reviewers. We love them, especially when they give us great reviews. We hate them when they don't. And I think that's the same thing. We have to be pragmatic with influencers as well. Is they are here to say the audience that once read Pete Wells, maybe they still do, but the audience, the generation that Pete Wells read Pete Wells and reviewers of the Bill Addisons, the Ruth Rochelles, etc. The next generation is on social media and they're
Mhm.
following the people, whether they be influencers or creators or next generation reviewers. That's where they're getting it. That's where they're finding their news. That's where they're finding out about new restaurants. That's where they're finding their next favorite chef. Influencers are part of that now. I think. Do I think that influencers should, that restaurants should be paying influencers to come and review? Absolutely not. Definitely not. Are there influencers who play the game in my mind with more integrity and almost act as next generation reviewers? Yes. In my opinion, focus your attention there. Don't pay these people to come because the reviews, the quality of the review, the quality of the awareness is going to be compromised.
Let's take a couple of questions. We've got some questions, folks. If you want to send me any questions for our media and branding guru, Ben Liebmann, please do. Here's one. Ben, have you seen a brand treated as an asset during an acquisition? How do you quantify the value of an email list, a social media following, a brand toolkit with logos, etc.?
David, that's goodwill, isn't it? In terms of that intangible thing that is often valued.
It's goodwill, and I
Uh,
actually could answer this and say that it really depends on what people are buying. Sometimes when
yeah,
someone's buying your restaurant or your restaurant group, um, they're not interested so much in the goodwill. They're interested in the hard assets, your build out, uh, whatever key money
the
deals,
equipment,
all
yeah.
that stuff. But sometimes they do actually want to buy your brand, and all of those things, your social media, your brand, your
Hmm.
trademark, are what they are buying. And so they are very, very interested in it. And you can put a monetary value on that. So if you're selling, I don't know, Shake Shack, it's all about that stuff. And
Yeah.
that's what they're going to be buying when they come
Which
around.
I'm going to be there is what he did, and then there's the way he went about it. But let's be rational here. That is fundamentally what drove the chili crisp versus chili crunch, controversy. Was that is Major Domo Foods getting its house in order, ensuring that it has the intellectual property, its brand, its assets, those kind of even though they're tangible things, they are intangible in the sense that they're not the physical spaces. That's not the equipment lift. It's not the key money, etc. But that was them getting their house in order for an event. Now that event is either a listing in terms of floating on the market or a sale, and that may not be today. It may not be for 10 years, but to David's point, when it comes time for somebody to either buy shares in Major Domo Foods or buy the company outright, one of the things that the lawyers and the owners will do is say, do you control that brand? Is that logo protected? What other kind of protections and marks have been registered and IP that has been protected? Um, Again, one could question the way in which they went about that. Should they have allowed those people, those independent small mom and pop operators, to coexist under certain conditions? But really, if we kind of take the emotion out of it for the moment, that's what they were doing. They were going about protecting the IP of their brand. Whether they should have been able to or not, that's another thing. But that's what they were doing. And that is to that point of um, having not only their house in order, but it being treated as an asset, either for a future acquisition or a float at some point.
You have any final words of advice for restaurateurs who are looking to expand through growing their brand? They're looking to diversify their portfolios. They're looking to get license and management deals. They're looking to get a cookbook on the shelves. They're
Yeah,
looking for some TV spots.
yeah. Take the time. As I said, if you think it'll end tomorrow, you'll make decisions that will invariably end up increasing the odds that it will end tomorrow. You'll stand for nothing instead of standing for something. Surround yourself with good people. Some of those can be, great minds inside your businesses. It can be people around it, people like David and his team, people like myself. There are plenty of others that can do that as well, that can be in your corner and help you develop that plan, articulate that plan, and go and execute that plan as well. But, as I said, going back to the very beginning, have a clear sense of your purpose, have a clear sense of your vision. You don't have to achieve it all on day one, but you want a marker on the horizon. Is the thing I always kind of refer to, is that general sense of we're heading there. We might kind of weave along the way. We might pivot into something else, and we might divert our attention into another area for a period of time, but that's the general direction. So yeah, the marker on the horizon is the thing that I would always talk to.
That's some sage advice, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for everybody.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Attended the webinar. We're going to have this on our YouTube channel. We'll be sending it to everybody who registered if you want to listen again. Thanks again, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks, Ben.
Have a good day, everyone. Thanks, buddy. See you soon.